Respected Madam Chairperson, my distinguished friends and delegates here, ladies and gentlemen. I shall try my level best to adhere to the time schedule. There is a clock right in front of me, and I assure you I shall, as I proceed with my lecture, I shall keep my eyes on that clock so that the time limit is not trespassed. And I'm speaking extempore, because PowerPoint presentation often takes away much of your time. Now, I shall, in the course of this brief presentation, try to acquaint you with the essential arguments of my paper, which I'll try to adumbrate in broad parameters. What I've tried to inquire into is when language movements take place, are they motivated by a genuine linguistic patriotism, or are they motivated by a kind of politicized agenda whereby the masterminds of the movement, who normally happen to be politicians, do they capitalize on the psychology of people who act as something like passive instruments of the movement rather than active agents? That is the seminal question I want to address. Now, language has a power of its own. There can be no two opinions about it. It's a medium for the articulation of the thoughts, beliefs, convictions, and emotions of a community. And the intensity which it evokes perhaps surpasses that which is evoked by many other ingredients central to nation building. I'm not sort of underrating the importance of other ingredients, but language certainly has a power of its own. It has a domain of its own. And though the time constraint is there, I cannot help quoting Miguel Unamuno, who said that language is the very blood of the spirit, the base of the community. And there can be, and actually it's a medium for the articulation of the innermost sentiments of a community, the unfoldment of the self of the community. Now, I have focused on two different kinds of linguistic patriotism. Now, I conducted projects on two ethnic movements. One was the Kamtapuri movement in North Bengal, and the other was the Gorkhaland movement, also in North Bengal. What I found was that, in fact, the findings of both these two projects of mine have been published in the form of two separate books. Now, what I discovered in case of the first movement, where the Rajbangshi tribe clamored for the recognition of a separate Kamtapuri language, which ultimately, according to the testimony of linguists, is nothing but a dialect of Bengali, a variant of the Bengali language. But they are, in fact, they tried to push forward the agenda that it is not Bengali, it has a separate existence. Now, the linguists have contended that, yes, a dialect can claim the status of a separate language. Occasionally, yes. But when? When the volume of literature it produces is really substantial. But where are the publications? That is the first contention. And the second contending logic would be this, that when you talk in terms of a separate language, which ultimately happens to be a dialect, first you have to produce publications of seminal importance. There is another point also. You just can't demand a state based on a dialect. Of course, a state can be formed on the basis of language, but it's an open question whether actually, there are various instances where states have been created on the basis of language, but is it feasible to create a state on the basis of a dialect? This is a very important question. And another point which I discovered during the course of my researches was that the proponents of this movement, Kamtapuri movement, were claiming that the language they used was different from Bengali. But the specimens which they produced to substantiate their assertion ultimately put it the other way around. Because those specimens ultimately happened to be Bengali, inescapably Bengali. Nothing could be different. So it was actually, this is the point where very often linguistic movements flounder on misplaced linguistic patriotism. Just one more point. The second kind of linguistic patriotism was regarding the Hindi-English controversy. I'm coming to it later. But there was another movement, the Maithili movement of Bihar, which started in 1940 and reached its high pitch in 1954. That movement was linguistically much more sound than this Kamtapuri movement. Why? Because even the most distinguished linguists like Suniti Kumar Chatterjee have conceded that Maithili is not it's just not Hindi. It is distinct from Hindi. But yet, why did that movement not ultimately succeed? Once again, the reason was, where were the publications? Even Nehru, in a book exhibition in Mithila in 1964, said that you must be able to make contributions to modern scientific literature. But where are these where are your contributions? So, but linguistically, that movement was on a much more solid ground than the Kamtapuri. But this was one reason, because of the lack of sufficient literature, and secondly, there was no really charismatic messianic leadership. This is the point on which A.F.C. Wallace has continuously emphasized. What does Wallace say? His point is that revitalization movements are a deliberate, conscious, organized effort to revitalize a culture which is gradually facing a challenge to its own survival. And messianic, charismatic leadership is central to it. This is the gist of it. Now, both the Kamtapuri and the Maithili movement were handicapped by the lack of a charismatic leadership, firstly. And secondly, the first movement was, it was not based on truth, but the second movement was, but it ultimately petered out. Now to come to the Hindi-English controversy. I think I have 7 minutes more, madam. Am I right? As the clock suggests that. Right, okay, I'll finish. Right. Now to come to the Hindi-English controversy. Now there have been many linguistic patriots who have forcefully advocated the use of Hindi as a substitute for English as India's national language. Now, linguists like Suniti Kumar Chatterjee have said that this would be suicidal, because it is through English, which is still today the most important linked language, I believe. Hindi may be widely spoken by a large strata of people, but as a linked language, English cannot be dispensed with. Now, Suniti Kumar Chatterjee made one more point. Now, Mahatma Gandhi he had no hostility towards the non-Hindi speaking people, but he was of the opinion that as a linked language, Hindi would be able to supplant English. This is where Suniti Kumar Chatterjee objected. He said that Gandhi was not aware of the ground reality, particularly in Bihar, where students speaking, say, Bengali, Uriya, or other languages were forced to abandon their mother tongue and speak and learn Hindi. Now, this was foreign to Gandhi's imagination. But perhaps on this point, Gandhi was more of a romantic idealist. Perhaps Nehru was nearer to the mark, because Nehru said that hostility towards English would be very, very detrimental, and it would not be conducive to national integration. And I may quote Rabindranath Tagore, Yes. Tagore made one point that when a crop, the crop sprouts out of the seeds. Now, if the seeds are from a foreign land, the crop which will be yielded will be foreign. But if the soil receives it, then the crop ceases to be foreign. It is just the same case with English. And many others have also said that, echoed the same sentiments, that to dispense with English would be a retrogressive step. Pramod Chaudhary was another Bengali intellectual who made this point. Now, as I will be devoting the last 5 minutes of my lecture to a brief reference to the European Union and the situation in the United States of America. Now, the European Union has been steadfastly devoted to its mission of inculcation of intercultural communion, and it has and its avowed commitment to multilingualism. And exactly as the three-language formula suggested by Sumit Mukerji, that English, vernacular, and one national language, similarly, the European Union has been advocating the mother tongue and 2 foreign languages. And the Eurobarometer survey, and also in the Barcelona objectives, everywhere we find the same point being reiterated forcefully. And the Eurobarometer survey has revealed very positive responses to multilingualism. And we find that in the 667th meeting of the European Union, it has been decided that these minority languages can be provided some recognition, as they have been in Spain, but they cannot be granted the status of official languages. So we find Sumit Mukerji being vindicated by the European Union. One more point from Samuel Huntington's seminal work, Who Are We? We know that in America, the situation is like this, that bilingualism, in fact, one of the manifestations of multiculturalism, has made gigantic strides in America. I need not elaborate because time is running out. You'll get it in my paper. But what is very interesting is that of late, in the opinion polls, we find the Hispanic parents arguing in favor of English education in place of bilingualism. So the erstwhile repugnance to English has evaporated. That recalcitrance is now giving way to acceptance. So ultimately, it looks like English will have the last laugh. Finally, now I end. In fact, in an opinion poll in the Orange County, 83% of the Hispanic parents expressed their desire that their wards should be taught English and not their mother tongue, not Spanish. Why? Because, according to Reverend Alice Callaghan, director of the Institute of Hispanic Studies, they want their children to be taught in Harvard or Stanford. And they know that this is possible only through English. It is ground reality rather than emotion, which is ultimately proving to be the order of the day. In the last 2 minutes, I will just make one observation. 1 minute, okay? I'll just conclude saying that in many linguistic movements, we find the people, they ultimately live with the illusion of a false identity, and language is crucified at the altar of politics, and it becomes a prey to all sorts of manipulations and chicaneries. And then, in place of revitalizing, the so-called revitalization of one's language, ultimately the language gets devitalized. It sounds the death knell of the language, and also the movement. Politics becomes the mother of the mother tongue. Here I end by quoting David Cokery's book, Fortunes of the Irish Question, that ultimately do languages really die, or do they commit suicide? He says that languages do not die. They are killed by those who are determined to destroy the nation. And this is exactly what happens in many cases, and India provides an illustration where self-interested politicians sound the death knell of many language movements. So I really now take leave of you all, conveying my heartfelt salutations to you all, and for bearing with me for these 15 minutes. Thank you.